Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning, I want to talk about the 100th anniversary of Soto Zen North America, which is going to be commemorated with a Jukai-E ceremony. And this is the flyer for it. Let's see if I can get it on there straight. Anyway, you can see they show a Kechimiyaku on the flyer, which is pretty nice. It's what the front of a Kechimiyaku that is written in Japanese looks like. And some stuff on the bottom. And this Jukai-E ceremony is happening next year, November 16th through the 20th, but our deadline to fill the 2 slots that we have 1 slot left, is going to be on the 13th. So if you're interested in this, after I give this lecture, your deadline is going to be next week. So that's what I want to talk about. First of all, I want to talk about the 100th year of Zenshuji. So Zenshuji is the headquarters of North America Zen, which essentially for the Japanese is the mainland of the United States. It doesn't include Hawaii or Guam or Puerto Rico or any of the protectorates. So this is about the 100th year of this founding of temple, Zenshuji, which is in Los Angeles in an area that's called Little Tokyo. Downtown, old downtown Los Angeles. And Zenshuji was founded in November of 1922. And I want to read to you what it says on the back of this flyer about Zenshuji. It said, 100 years ago, a small Zen group was born in the city of Los Angeles on November 20th, 1922, after the pandemic of the Spanish flu had been finally contained. Would that the pandemic of COVID be finally, at least that we have it under control. But anyway, this was right after the Spanish flu pandemic. This group rented a space on the 2nd floor of a private house and put up a sign which said, Soto Zen Buddhism North America Buddhist Church. Then they built an assembly hall and named it Zenshuji Temple. The first thing they did after celebrating the completion of the Zenshuji Temple was the commemoration service for their ancestors and the Jukai-E ceremony, where they gave the precepts and the Kechimiyaku karmic connection charts to the people. That's how the Soto Zen Buddhism in North America was given birth. During the last 100 years, Soto Zen Buddhism spread across North America, and there are now over 200 temples and Zen centers and 800 Soto Zen priests. So in this, they're counting all of the American Zen centers. Zenshuji, of course, is American, but it's mostly associated with the Japanese American community. During the last 100 years, etc., though many of their Dharma lineages share the same roots, they have become so diverse and complex that they are often unaware of the presence of their distant Dharma relatives. So this is a reference to mostly white Anglo Zen students who go to Zen centers that were founded by Soto Zen priests in the United States, Maizumi Roshi, Suzuki Roshi, etc. But we think of Soto Zen being founded in the United States in usually the late 1950s and 60s. But the reality is that Soto Zen came to the United States in response to the needs of the Japanese American community. And there were many more temples in the United States. For example, there was one down in Monterey than there are now, but the 2 main temples are Zenshuji in LA, which is the head temple, and Sokoji in San Francisco. On this occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Soto Zen Buddhism in North America, we are going back to the root of our origin and once again share the Jukai-E ceremony with our Dharma brothers and sisters of the Greater Sangha in North America and the world with 100 recipients of the precepts. So what's happened is that Jaku and I received a notice saying, because we are registered priests in the Japanese Soto school, we hold the appointment of Kokusai Fukiyoshi, which is international Dharma teachers for the Soto Shu, and therefore we're one of about 50 people in the United States who have this appointment, and all of us who have temples, we received a notice saying you can have this many people come to Jukai, and we have 2. And one of those slots has already been taken and the other slot is still open. So I'm here to tell you about this ceremony in case you're interested in doing it. So again, to go back to talking a little bit about how we think of as what is mostly a white American Soto Zen, founded originally, was brought to this country by Shunryu Suzuki, who founded our lineage in 1959, was when he came, and Dainin Katagiri Roshi and Taizan Maizumi Roshi. Now, Suzuki Roshi and originally came to San Francisco in 1959, and he came to minister to the Japanese American community in San Francisco. And after a few years, some Americans started showing up. Excuse me, that is not, this is like embarrassing. Some white, young Anglo-Americans showed up to Zenshuji and started sitting Zazen. And they, Suzuki Roshi bonded with them, and eventually that became San Francisco Zen Center. He split off as from being a missionary for the Soto Shu, assigned to Sokoji, and started San Francisco Zen Center with the students who were coming. A lot of them were hippies. Not all, though. There was one woman in her 40s named Della Gertz who came. So there was a wide range, but most of them were younger people who had, who we characterize now as hippies back in the day, in the early 60s. Oh, back when many of us were younger, in our 20s. Anyway, and the same thing happened with Maizumi Roshi. He had been assigned to Zenshuji, and then same kind of phenomena happened for him, and he started Zen Center of Los Angeles. And Katagiri Roshi originally came to the temple in Los Angeles, Zenshuji, and then he came and helped Suzuki Roshi, and then he went to Minnesota and opened the Minnesota Zen Center. Okay, so that's kind of like how, what we in this very myopic way who attend what we call Zen centers, that are, the word Zen center really refers to a certain kind of Buddhist temple that was created in this country in the 50s and 60s. And Zenshuji and Sokoji represent and are still practicing a style of Soto Zen that is supported by, and mainly still at this point for, but not completely, the Japanese American community. So we should know that, strictly speaking, Soto Zen was brought to the United States 100 years ago, and that Soto Zen began at Zenshuji Temple and was brought here by missionaries, priests from Japan. So American Zen centers, what we think of as American Zen centers, I would say are kind of hybrid of the monastic practice in Japan for Soto Zen priests. So if you look at the schedule of the residents who live, say, at City Center, at San Francisco Zen Center, that's a kind of hybrid monastic style of practice. The temple-based practice in Japan is very much geared towards lay people and the needs of lay people. And I would say there's not as much emphasis on Zazen, and it's not so, it's not based on a monastic practice. I think it's based more on what is perceived to be the needs of the congregants who are lay people who are working, etc. And so I would say that this is a model that Jaku and I have been trying to incorporate at Ocean Gate. Again, Zenshuji was established 100 years as of next year. And to honor this, Zenshuji is hosting a 5-day Jukai-E, which means receiving the precepts assembly, or it's also known as Dai Jukai, or Great Receiving Precepts. So in Japan, this ceremony, which is either a 5-day or a 7-day ceremony, is offered only once a year at the two head temples, Sojiji and Eiheiji. And the last time Jukai was offered in the United States was 20 years ago. That was at Zenshuji. And so the ceremony happens infrequently on this scale. Okay, so how does this ceremony differ from what we call Jukai when we receive the Rakusu and our Dharma names? So I'm not exactly sure how the short version of Jukai that we perform was developed. I think it was something that perhaps, I'm not sure, that Suzuki Roshi developed based on an ordination ceremony for Shukkei Tokudo, which is a priest ordination. I don't know if the ceremony exists in Japan. It might. And if people are interested in this, we can do a little research and see if we can find out how this came about. One of the differences in the ceremony is that the Jukai-E, the Dai Jukai-E that's being done in the Soto, this longer version, is not so much based on a student-teacher relationship. While you are specifically receiving precepts from a particular person, the preceptor, in this case, it would be the Sokan or bishop of North America, whose name is Akiba Roshi. He'll be giving the precepts to everyone, but it's not based on having a student-teacher relationship with him. Again, the ceremony is not performed very frequently, and here in the United States, we do Jukai at least once a year, usually at Ocean Gate, and in some centers it's done more often. San Francisco Zen Center, I think, sometimes twice a year, depending on how many people, but it's done more frequently. And of course, the ceremony itself takes, an hour? Depending on the number of people receiving precepts, it could be longer. Jaku and I were in a group. Well, I think Jaku was not in my group. No, I received precepts at Green Gulch from Tenshin Reb Anderson, and my ceremony was 30 people. And so you can imagine that took a little while, didn't happen in an hour, took longer than that. And of course, I sewed rakusu, as have all of you who have rakusus, and that's not part of this Jukai-E. There's no rakusus involved in this. You receive a kechimiyaku. In our ceremony, we receive Dharma names from our teachers. You can, in the Jukai-E ceremony at Zenshuji, if you have a Dharma name, that's the name that will be put on the kechimiyaku. If you don't have a Dharma name, you'll be given a Dharma name. Since the person who's giving you the Dharma name does not know you, in the Jukai-E ceremony, the longer version, there's a different feeling about how that name comes about. And I would say it's more of a feeling of a kind of karmic connection that is being brought up and about through this, what we might think is a kind of random way to receive a Dharma name, but actually that it has a deeper interconnected way in which that it surfaces and is applicable to you. So in the United States, usually when we do Jukai, lay Jukai, and also priest Jukai ceremonies, when we receive the precepts, we only do it once. So usually when we do precepts once. In Japan, you can attend this ceremony as many times as you like, over and over and over again every year. There are people who do that. They go to the big temples and they do these ceremonies, and they do the ceremony every year, over and over again. And so it's a different kind of ceremony. And the other thing about this ceremony, which is also true of our Jukai ceremony, but it's very much more obvious in the 5-day ceremony, is that this is an esoteric ceremony. And you're receiving an offering from the priest to you as a lay practitioner. And also there are priests who do this ceremony as well. But the ceremony involves, in our case, talking about and Jaku and I are both involved in the ceremony, there will be 70 priests involved in performing this ceremony at Zenshuji next year. And at Eheiji, where the ceremony happens, and there will be 300 people receiving precepts. So at Zenshuji, the limit is 100, but at Eheiji, there might be 300 people. There will be as many clergy supporting this activity as there are participants. So in our case, we've got 100 ordaintees and about 70 priests involved in it. And then, of course, there are other people who are lay supporters of Zenshuji who will be doing things like helping lunch happen and all that kind of stuff. So there's other people involved as well. So you can see that this Jukai-E ceremony is a real labor of love, if you will, from the ordained and the temple members at Zenshuji to support this huge ceremony that happens. And this is this sincerely offered occasion of helping us to let go of our misdeeds, to repent or atone, if you will, for the things that we have done, and renewing our deep relationship with the Buddha way. And so it's a time of reflection and renewal for the people who participate in the ceremony. Okay, so just what exactly is it that if you went to this ceremony, what exactly would you be doing while you were there for 5 days? So we have our instructions here on how to do the ceremony, and the instructions for the ceremony are 83 pages long. Okay, and then we also have this chart here. And this lays out what happens during the 5 days of the ceremony. So Rihanna goes, wow, yeah, big deal. All right, so what is it that if you went to the ceremony, what is it that you would be doing at the ceremony? Okay, so the ceremony is 5 days. Days 1 through 4, you're going to arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning. The first day you arrive at 8:30. You have a little reprieve there of half an hour. But after that, you arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning. The first day, there's a little reception for everybody. And then what happens is a short period of zazen, probably half an hour, 20 minutes, something like that. And then what happens is a series of ceremonies that happen throughout the course of, there are ceremonies throughout the course of every one of the days. And I can tell you what they are, but I don't think it's very helpful to you. One's called Go Shofugen, so that happens at 10 o'clock on the first day. Sutra chanting for greeting sacred beings. That's the first ceremony that happens. And then the next one is the Kaishi arrives, and that's the head preceptor arrives, and then there are bells and prostrations. Kaiden Jogu, and then there is sutra chanting, more sutra chanting. and then something called Setsu Kuyo, which is offerings for the sutra chanting, and then lunch. Okay, that's the first morning of what you're doing, but usually in the morning there's actually lectures that happen as well. So ceremonies and lectures, Dharma talks. So usually there'll be this series of ceremonies. So they might be ceremonies that have to do with welcoming the spirits from the land upon which the temple is built. Ceremonies welcoming the Buddhas and ancestors, things like that. There will be a lecture on precepts, either once or twice a day. There's lunch every day. So usually there's a precepts lecture in the morning, and there's a talk on precepts in the afternoon, and there's also 2 Dharma talks that happen in the afternoon. They're not like back to back, there's breaks between them, and there's some more ceremony and chanting. And then at the very end, there's a little bit of zazen to close the day, and the day ends at 6:30 in the evening. Now, I want to say to you, this is not like what we associate a shishin to be. So in the United States, when we do shishin, we're talking about alternating periods of zazen where we're sitting for 40 minutes and walking for 10 minutes and sitting for 40 minutes, etc. This is a ceremony where, for the most part, as an attendee, you will be sitting in a pew or a chair. You're not going to be sitting zazen, and you're not going to be sitting on zafus. So at Zenshuji, the way the temple is set up, and this is also true at Sokoji, is that the altar itself, which is huge, is what we would say is up on a stage. So in front of you is this huge altar, kind of the size of a small mobile home, and chandeliers, which represent offerings to the Buddha, raining down from the sky with little bells on them and things, that big giant chandelier in the middle. The altar is like several tiers. And then, so this is what the altar is like. And again, it's on a stage. Usually the priests are up on the stage in rows, which is called the ryoban. And then down on the main part where you would be sitting are pews. So they're actually, like going to church with wooden pews and cushions on them. So that's where, if you attend the ceremony, that's where you're going to be sitting, is in the pews. So it's not going to be physically arduous, although needless to say, no matter how you're sitting, if you're there for 5 days, listening to lectures and chanting and participating in ceremonies, it's going to be somewhat physically taxing. But on the other hand, the intensity of it is going to bring forward a kind of contemplative state of mind as we go through this process. And you will be shepherded around by people, so nobody expects you to know how to do all this stuff yourself. You're going to have minders, if you will, people who are taking care of you and making sure that you know where you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to do and that kind of thing. And it's called I think it's head of the platform. I think that's what Edo's title is. I think that person's name is head of the platform. Let me take a look here. I also have a list of everybody's jobs in here. Although I think it's kind of funny because the list of everybody's jobs is called casting. I feel like we're in I think that's, it's funny. It feels like we're in like a Broadway show or something. Excuse me. The list of very small print, like 7.9 print, is the lists and lists and lists of our jobs, who's doing what. Yes, platform manager. who is our friend, Edjo McMullen, who's a wonderful guy. So Edjo will do a great job of taking care of you. And he has like 4 assistants, so. All right, so each day the ceremonies are going to be, there's going to be a variety of ceremonies. And then the 5th day is over by noon. And on the night of the 3rd and the 4th day are the primary ceremonies around this event, the ceremonies of repentance and the ceremonies of receiving precepts and the Kechimyaku. And I'm not going to talk about those tell you, because if you go, it would be a wonderful, magical experience. And I don't want to tell you anything too much about it, but it does involve chanting, rooms, red rooms, and circumambulation, and going up on the altar. So that's part of what will happen. But it's good not to go with some kind of preconceived idea about what it's going to be, because it's very special, and people who've done it are very moved by it. So I'm really looking forward to being there. I'm sure Jaku is too, because I'm very much looking forward to seeing what this is going to be like. And we won't get to do the precepts. We're not going to get to do the fun part in a way, but I hope that we'll be able to either watch or participate in part of this. That's the esoteric part. So anyway, the centering part of this whole ceremony has to do with letting go of karmic misdeeds, reflecting on our life, and affirming our vows. So it's a kind of esoteric and mystery about our relationship with all beings, with the ancestors, with the Buddhas, deceased ancestors of particular families. So I don't know how much of this is going to be happening at Zenshuji, but in these ceremonies in Japan, people will come and have the precepts given to someone who's a deceased family member. So that family member's name, they'll be given either whatever their Buddhist name is, or they'll be given a Dunarba name, and they actually receive a Kechimyaku, and the family is given the Kechimyaku. So that's also part of what's happening, as well as this way of giving the precepts and including the ancestors of the land of where this temple is. So that's also part of the ceremony, and that is going to happen in the ceremony at Zenshuji. Okay, so the ceremony itself, again, it took hundreds of years to develop the ceremony. But when you go back to the origins of Jukai, it is a reflection of Shakyamuni's wish to alleviate the suffering of living beings and to promote harmony, and to be able to express and live the truth of our shared interconnection with all beings and everything. So that's why part of the ceremony involves inviting the Buddhas and ancestors and the deities of the land to come forth and witness and support this ceremony. And then here is what we were told. So I'll give you the Japanese perspective on how this ceremony is talked about. And because when we went to Los Angeles this last time, I guess it was last month, when we went there the end of last month, we received instructions on actually how the most esoteric ceremonies are done, as well as about the meaning of the precepts. So this is what the lecturer said, and I'm paraphrasing it. He said, Buddhist precepts cannot be strictly observed. So we have this ceremony to say, I will uphold these precepts. But the meaning of the ceremony is not about if you will observe a particular precept. Rather, it's about the question of how do we live in a humble manner as Buddhists in the middle of your inevitable failures. So as we live this life of ours, we cannot live it alone. Our life is always interdependent, and the precepts strengthen this awareness. The precepts strengthen our awareness of our interdependence, and they are a vow to recall and live these teachings. So if we're looking at the ceremony from this way, he said, this is not really about observing the precepts. He says, don't get caught up in wanting to be pure in some way. It's about the question of, do we have the mind to live as a Buddhist? Do we have the mind to live as a Buddhist? Can we be bodhisattvas in the Saha world? In this ceremony, you are reaffirming this vow and realigning yourself as part of the lineage of Shakyamuni. So that's the reason that you can do the ceremony many, many, many times. So to just wrap this up, Ocean Gate has 2 slots. We have 1 left open. If you think you're interested in attending this ceremony, please let Jaku or I know. And we need to know by the end of this coming week. And there is money involved, but Ocean Gate can help with that. So don't let that deter you from letting us know if you're interested in coming to do this ceremony. Yeah, so there you have it. Thank you.